Elemental Wells have had a very mixed reception since Bungie introduced them in Season of the Chosen. On release, the few Elemental Well mods that we received left plenty to be desired, but fast forward now to the launch of Witch Queen, it's very clear that these mods have a place in the meta, the sandbox, and with some specialty mods seemingly popping up in each seasonal artifact, there's also a place for them in your favourite loadouts. G'day Guardians, my name is Matt, and I am the self-proclaimed president of the Elemental Well Appreciation Club. Feel free to join the club today for a small fee of dismantling those crusty old Ikelos and Seven Seraph weapons, and you too could be living it up in this Elemental Well paradise. Just kidding. But today, we are going to do a big deep dive into why you should be running Elemental Well mods now that we are in full force Witch Queen mode. I'll be breaking each mod down into different categories, explaining some basic synergies, and providing legitimate reasons why Elemental Well mods work, how they work, when they should work, and what exactly do they even do. Just before we start, I would like to mention that Roguey and I, who creates content on this channel with me, we're running an Emblem Giveaway to say thank you for all of the support on our videos since Witch Queen has launched. I think we've gained a couple hundred subscribers since it launched, and in this first week, with these last handful of videos that we've made, we have amassed tens of thousands of views. So as a token of appreciation, we'll be giving away 3 Archive of Twilight emblems. To be in the running, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, make sure that the bell's on for those notifications, give the video a thumbs up, and comment what your favorite Elemental Well loadout is. Hopefully something juicy after going through this video. Alright, back to it. I know there is plenty of skepticism about Elemental Wells. Change isn't always easy, and new doesn't always mean better. Before we dive in and get a good understanding of Elemental Well mods, I think it's important to see why Warmind Cell mods felt so good and why Charge with Light mods still hold up nicely today. Warmind Cells, for the most part, were extremely effective at aggressive and offensive gameplay. Yes, they had a handful of protective, debuff, and defensive mods, but that's not how they made a name for themselves. It was really quite simple. You used gun made bubble blew everything up in the room. It made you feel incredibly confident tackling any activity in the game, which was the whole appeal, because for a virtual video game, you could kind of feel the physical effects of how strong you were. On the other hand, Charge with Light mods are incredibly accessible and are for the most part very transactional. Almost every Charge with Light mod reads, if you have 1 stack of Charge with Light, you can have this. It's literally like handing money over a counter. You go into the store and you know exactly what you're buying. With Charge with Light mods, you have complete control over what you spend your stack of Charge with Light on. The drawback to both of these in the current sandbox is that Warmind Cells received a very large nerf. They were too good at what they did, and in a sandbox where Bungie wants to make new, exciting, and even craftable weapons, they don't want players to be using the same weapons from years ago and missing out on new and exciting experiences. Imagine going into the Witch Queen campaign and Warmind Cells are clearing every single room. It wouldn't have been the same fantastic experience that I'm sure that you experienced in that first week. Charge with Light mods, on the other hand, didn't receive a direct nerf, but Bungie altered the way in which players can generate orbs of power. Previously, a masterworked weapon dropped orbs of power on rapid kills, which allowed players to bank up stacks of Charge with Light with, effortlessly. Although now, there's extra mods in place that are very much required if you still want to generate orbs of power. Charge with Light mods are still fantastic, but I would go out on a limb and say that they're just slightly less accessible if you're not coordinating a proper loadout within your fire team. But enough about Warmind Cells and Charge with Light mods. This is about Elemental Wells and how they have insane value for you and your fire team. Let's start with what actually is an Elemental Well. If you hover over every single one of the Elemental Well mods, they all have a spiel at the bottom that states the same thing. An Elemental Well grants energy to your ability with the lowest current energy. Picking up an Elemental Well with an element that matches your subclass will grant energy to all abilities. So if you're running Solar, and you've just thrown your grenade, and you see that your teammate has made a Stasis Elemental Well, which is different because you're Solar, you can grab that and it'll give you some energy for your grenade cooldown. Although if you're also running Stasis, and you've just used all of your abilities, and you see that Stasis Elemental Well on the ground that your teammate made for you, it'll give you energy back on all 3 abilities, and that's because it matches your subclass. This energy that you get back is about 10% on your cooldown's worth, which is pretty nice for just walking over a well. You'll find a lot of the elemental well mods have greater synergies when running the same subclass as the one that you've picked up off the ground, but we'll dive into that a little bit later because there's also plenty of mods that create different types of elements on the elemental wells, and not to mention that you can coordinate with your teammates to make certain types of elemental wells as well. It's a lot of wells. But we can't just rely on our teammates to make elemental wells for us. I mean, I wish we could. It would be super nice. But sometimes we have to put our own grown-up pants on and do it ourselves. In this section of the video, I'm going to be diving into all the different mods that allow us to create an elemental well, remembering that these also spawn for our fire team as well. First up is elemental armaments, where kills with your weapon that match your subclass element have an escalating chance to spawn an elemental well. Similarly to Warmind Cells, it's about 5 or so kills with your weapon where it'll then generate a well. You need to be matching the same subclass as the weapon. For example, if you're running Stasis and you have an Ice Lunar hand cannon, well then after those handful of kills, you'll generate a Stasis elemental well. If you're running Stasis but you decide to use Vex Mytho class, well an elemental well won't spawn at all. Elemental Light will spawn an elemental well when you get a kill with your super. Unfortunately, kills inside of a well of radiance or using weapons of light from a bubble don't count. But if you're running something like hammers on a titan, then you'll be spawning solar elemental wells with each kill that you get. Elemental ordnance will generate an elemental well when defeating an enemy with your grenade. It's worth noting that if your grenade kills a few adds, it will still just generate a single well. Think of it as the act of the grenade killing things will spawn a well. It's not one kill equals one well. Shield Crash Wellmaker will spawn an elemental well matching your weapon's element for breaking a combatant's shield of that same element. It's a lot of elements. But basically, if you're running Vex Mytho class and you break a solar shield with it, you will then spawn a solar elemental well, regardless of whichever subclass you're using. Overcharge Wellmaker will spawn 2 arc elemental wells when finishing an enemy. This mod completely disregards whatever subclass you're running. You could be on solar or stasis, it really doesn't matter. Just finishing an enemy will guarantee you 2 arc elemental wells. For Explosive Wellmaker, rapidly defeating combatants with explosive damage spawns a solar elemental well. A lot of people get tricked up on this one because the wording is a little bit funny. There's a handful of things in the game that can actually cause explosive damage, and it's that specifically that generates the elemental well. If you're running Ashen Wake on a Titan where the fusion grenades explode on impact, they create explosive damage. But remember, this well generates on rapid kills with explosiveness, so if you threw one fusion at a pack of adds, it'll generate one elemental well from elemental ordnance, provided that you're using that, but it'll generate a second elemental well from the fact that multiple adds died in this explosion. Another example is Chain Reaction. If you're using Salvage's Salvo and you kill an enemy, it won't spawn a well, but if the Chain Reaction procs and it kills some nearby adds, that interaction will cause Explosive Wellmaker to generate a solar well. It's a whole lot of work for really little return, so it's not a mod that I usually run often. Reaping Wellmaker, one of my personal favorites on the other hand, will spawn a Void Elemental Well after you activate your class ability and get a kill. This is particularly effective on hunters since their dodge roll can get down to an 11-second cooldown. In this instance, you dodge roll, get a kill, collect your elemental well, dodge roll, kill, collect the well, and just repeat. Melee Wellmaker is fairly straightforward. A powered melee kill will spawn an elemental well. It's particularly fun on Middle Tree Solar for Titans, where you can constantly have your throwing hammer up, which counts as a powered melee. Supreme Wellmaker is also very straightforward, where it simply spawns 3 stasis elemental wells when you cast your super. Regardless of which subclass you're using, they will just remain stasis wells. And lastly, I'd just like to mention that depending on when you watch this video, there may be generating mods within the seasonal artifact. Right now in Season of the Risen, there isn't any, but last season in Season of the Lost, we had one called Fire and Ice, where killing a champion spawned 2 solar and 2 stasis wells, so keep an eye on the artifact throughout the seasons to come. So now we have a really good idea of what can actually make elemental wells, but making them is only half the story. We want to start benefiting from the effect mods. These are the elemental well mods that give us something in return for collecting them. Kicking off the list is Elemental Charge, where picking up any old elemental well will give you 1 stack of Charge with Light, but if the well matches your subclass, then it'll give you 2 stacks of Charge with Light. This is the perfect mod to help bridge the gap between using elemental wells and Charge with Light mods. Next up is Font of Might, one of everyone's favorite damage buffs, because when you pick it up, you get 25% damage buff on your weapon that lasts for about 10 seconds. The catch is that the weapon's element needs to match your subclass. So if you're running a Falling Guillotine sword, which is Void, and you're playing the Void subclass, you can pick up a Void Elemental Well, and that will give you a 25% damage buff on the sword. People really like this mod because it isn't considered a weapon buff, but more so a Guardian enhancement. So it actually stacks with things like Weapons of Light, High Energy Fire, or Empowering Rift. Font of Wisdom has some great utility where picking up an elemental well that matches your subclass will grant 30 seconds of max intellect. What this means is that when it comes time to making builds, you can allocate as little stat points to intellect as you want. Because while Font of Wisdom is active, you theoretically recharge as fast as you would if you had 100 intellect. The only thing to consider is that you need to make sure you're generating or picking up an elemental well every 30 seconds to keep this increased charge rate on. Well of Ions will proc when you pick up an Arc Elemental Well, which will cause your next melee to deal increased damage, one of my absolute favorites to run with the Liar's Handshake exotic on my Hunter. Well of Life. Picking up a Solar Elemental Well grants increased health regen for a short time. The main thing I like about this mod is that the heals are instant. If you are on 1 HP and you walk over that Solar Well with Well of Life equipped, you'll immediately receive health back and then continue to heal for that small time duration. Well of Tenacity is one that feels a little bit like Protective Light, but does have its differences. You don't really get to choose when you want that protection because it automatically procs when you collect the Elemental Well, which reads, picking up a Void Elemental Well reduces the damage you take from combatants for a short while. Well of Striking is a nice and basic one where picking up a Arc Elemental Well will grant additional melee energy back to you. It also reads that this mod's effect will increase when stacking multiple copies of it. An example of this would be running Middle Tree Arc on a Titan with Melee Wellmaker on and a few copies of Well of Striking. Once you Ballistic Slam into some adds, you'll generate an Arc Well, and because you have a few copies of Well of Striking on, along with the intrinsic 10% of the energy that an Elemental Well just gives you for free, you will probably get like a full refund back on your melee, which is pretty cool. Well of Ordnance, much like the counterpart to Well of Striking, will grant additional grenade energy back when collecting a Solar Elemental Well, again increasing effect for multiple copies of this mod. Now, we've had a mod that increases our melee energy and grenade energy when picking up an Elemental Well, so of course there'd be one for our class ability. Well of Utility. Picking up a Void Elemental Well grants additional class ability energy, again stacking with multiple copies of this mod. Well of Restoration is kind of like a jacked up version of just a base level standard elemental well. It grants additional energy to whichever ability just has the lowest energy. And lastly, in Season of the Risen currently, we do have Volatile Flow from the seasonal artifact, which has been a lot of fun so far, and that's giving our Void weapons volatile rounds when we collect a Void Elemental Well. Volatile rounds is of course causing enemies to explode on kill. Pairing this with the new world drop SMG, the Funnel Web, aka Recluse 2.0, makes for a lot of exploding adds. We're now left with the final category of Elemental Well mods, the ones that enhance the experience within our effect mods. We've generated Elemental Wells now, we've felt the impact of those wells through our effect mods, but now we can alter how those mods work for us. First up is Seeking Wells, where elemental wells that you create will move across the ground towards you and your fire team. When elemental wells were first introduced, a large complaint from the community was that it was annoying to have to physically go over and collect the well. So in Season of the Lost, this mod was introduced and it's fantastic. My favorite thing about it is that if you create an elemental well with Seeking Wells equipped, those wells will seek to your fire team, even if they don't have Seeking Wells on. So if all 3 fire team members were churning out elemental wells constantly and you all had Seeking Wells on, you would have a barrage of elemental wells constantly coming your way. It's amazing. Bountiful Wells, this one causes you to spawn additional elemental wells for each copy of a generating elemental well mod. It reads terribly and a lot of people get confused by it, but I will try and simplify it. If you use Melee Wellmaker and you get a melee kill, you will then get an Elemental Well. But if you have Bountiful Wells on, you will then generate 2 Elemental Wells from that single melee kill. But here's where it gets better. It stacks onwards. If you run 2 Melee Wellmaker mods and Bountiful Wells, it will now generate 3 Elemental Well mods for that single melee kill. However many generating mods you have on, if you pair it with Bountiful Wells, it'll always give you an additional. Normally, generating mods can't stack, so you'll always need Bountiful Wells on if you want to make multiple Elemental Wells from your generation mods. An example, and the last example I'll give because I'm trying to be pretty thorough with this one, 4 Melee Wellmakers with Bountiful Wells will give you 5 Elemental Wells for a single melee kill. Elemental Shards is a mod that really opened up build crafting last season. It turns your stasis shards into stasis elemental wells. I was tossing up whether or not to consider this as a generating mod, since you can generate stasis shards fairly easily on the stasis subclass, especially with weapons like Aegis Scepter and perks like Headstone, but in its essence, it is altering the elemental well experience, hence why I landed it on this category. On the Stasis subclass, Warlocks can generate Stasis Shards by simply freezing enemies, Titans have to break Stasis Crystals, and Hunters must kill a frozen target. All will generate a Stasis Shard, and with this mod, can now be used as an Elemental Well. Elemental Time Dilation is a stacking mod, which will increase the time-related benefit from any effect mod. For example, Font of Might is a 10-second damage buff to your weapons, but if you ran multiple copies of Font of Might paired with Elemental Time Dilation, that damage buff can go upwards of 17 seconds long instead. And lastly, Enduring Wells. This increases the length of time in which an Elemental Well can sit on the ground before it despawns. Multiple copies of this mod will increase its lifespan before needing to get picked up. I've never found myself needing to use this mod once, but we have it anyway. Alright, so now we've covered the complete array of Elemental Well mods within Destiny 2 right now. While it can be a little overwhelming, it's important to distinguish the difference in Elemental Well mods that generate Elemental Wells, mods that give you an effect, and mods that can alter or enhance the well's purpose. But how do we throw it all together? For the purpose of this video, I'll be using Dim to organize it, and if this is something that I should do in a detailed tutorial later on, please let me know in the comments, because I've been on the fence whether or not I should make a video like that for a while now. But it's also very doable to do this in-game as well. It's important to remember that you can only have 5 Elemental Well mods at a time, since they are taking up our combat mod slot. There's 2 different places I like to start when stringing an Elemental Well loadout together. The first way is I look at what I want to do with the generation mods, and I build up from there. If I'm focusing on the generating aspect, I look for what's convenient for me with what I'm playing at the time. At the moment, I'm playing a lot of Middle Tree Solar Titans, so Melee Wellmaker is a no-brainer to make some Solar Elemental Wells. What I do next is I see if I can gain any kind of effect from a Solar Elemental Well. I know Solar Wells can proc Well of Life, so with my hammer giving me Solar Wells all the time, I know that those wells can give me a constant flow of healing through Well of Life now. With plenty of mod slots left, I might opt into something like Elemental Charge, so that this Solar Well can give me 2 stacks of Charge with Light, and this means that I can spend those stacks on something like Protective Light for that ultimate survivability. With 1 mod slot left, I might see how I can alter or enhance this experience, and if I'm really enjoying this healing aspect from Well of Life, I might opt into something like Elemental Time Dilation, so that the healing time is increased even longer. The other place that you can start when stringing together an Elemental Well loadout is actually at the end. Think about what you want to achieve and work backwards so that you can shape it around your playstyle. I might be really enjoying Aegis Scepter as a weapon and notice that it's a stasis weapon too, but I want it to feel even stronger. I know that Font of Might is a 25% damage buff, and it's a mod that can stack with High Energy Fire, a 20% damage buff. Already there, I have my goal. So now I need to optimize a loadout to achieve this. For Font of Might to proc, I'll need a Stasis Elemental Well, and for High Energy Fire, I'll need to make sure I've got stacks of Charge with Light. Since I know that I'm already going to be using Elemental Wells, I'll put on Elemental Charge, so now that my Wells will give me Charge with Light stacks to feed High Energy Fire. but now I need a way of generating stasis elemental wells, and as you can see, I'm sort of working backwards here. I know as a warlock, I can freeze an enemy to generate a stasis shard, so if I use the elemental shards mod, it'll turn those into elemental wells for me, giving me font of might and making me charge with light for my high energy fire all at the same time. And that's only with 4 mods on. I could tack on Font of Wisdom for some faster supers, or Melee Wellmaker for another reliable way to make elemental wells. The potential is truly endless. But ladies and gentlemen, that's everything from me. I hope you learned a thing or two about incorporating elemental wells into your day-to-day gameplay. If you've been an elemental well denier, then give them a go. Let me know if the info from this video has changed your mind at all, or if you're still on the fence, or if you still hate them with fiery passion because Warmind Cells aren't in a good spot anymore. Before I sign off, don't forget to enter the giveaway by subscribing and hitting the bell for those notifications, dropping a like on the video, and commenting what your go-to elemental well loadout is now. As always, take it easy, Guardians.